He found her stranded, wheelchair tipped in the mud, and carried her 3 miles on his back. What no one knew beneath her trembling gratitude, she was texting her billionaire brother coordinates, watching this single father's calloused hands hold her steady, wondering if people like him still existed in her world. Daniel Harper's pickup truck rattled down the rural highway as rain hammered against the windshield with a fury that matched the ache in his shoulders. The construction site had demanded everything from him today, 12 hours of lifting and hauling that left his muscles screaming and his hands raw. But the paycheck would cover half the rent, and that was all that mattered. The wipers scraped across the glass in their rhythmic complaint when something caught his eye through the downpour. A shape that didn't belong in the gathering darkness. He slowed the truck, squinting through the rain, and his heart lurched. An overturned wheelchair lay in the mud beside a luxury van with a flat tire, its sleek black paint streaked with dirt, and beside it, barely visible in the failing light, a woman sprawled in the mud. Daniel didn't think. His body moved before his mind could catalog the reasons this might be dangerous or complicated, or none of his business. He pulled to the shoulder, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cold rain that immediately soaked through his worn flannel shirt. The mud sucked at his work boots as he waded toward her, and up close he could see she was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair plastered to her face and designer clothes ruined beyond recognition. Her eyes were wide, startled, defensive in a way that spoke of too many disappointments. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" His voice was gentle, the same tone he used when Emma woke from nightmares. The woman stared at him as if trying to decode his intentions. And something in his weathered face, the genuine concern etched in lines earned through hardship, seemed to satisfy whatever test she was conducting. "My phone died," she said, and he noticed the slight tremor in her voice. "My friend was driving, had to walk for help." Daniel nodded, examining the wheelchair with the eye of someone who fixed broken things for a living. One wheel was completely shattered, the frame bent, mud caked into every joint. His mind ran through options and discarded them just as quickly. The rain was getting colder, night was falling, and this woman needed warmth and safety more than she needed a mechanical solution. "I'll carry you," he said, making the decision as he spoke. "My place is 3 miles down this road. You can call from there, get warm, figure out your next step." He saw surprise flicker across her face, maybe suspicion, but then she nodded. As Daniel lifted her from the mud, his back protesting the additional weight after a day that had already asked too much, he didn't see her discreetly pull a phone from her pocket, the screen glowing bright in the dimness. Isabella Winters typed with shaking fingers, sending coordinates to her brother Alexander with a message that was both insurance and curiosity. Found help. Tracking on. Observing. She watched Daniel's face as he adjusted her weight, settling her against his back, his calloused hands careful and impersonal. His jaw was set with determination, rain running down his neck into his collar, and she studied him the way a scientist studies an unexpected variable. Was this performance? Did he recognize her face from magazine covers and society pages? Or was this something she'd almost forgotten existed, something her world of calculated transactions and ulterior motives had trained her to doubt? The 3 miles stretched before them like a test Daniel hadn't signed up for but wouldn't abandon. His shoulders, already damaged from a construction accident 2 years prior, burned with each step, but he kept his breathing steady, his pace constant. Rain fell in sheets, turning the dirt road into a treacherous river of mud. Isabella broke the silence first, her voice close to his ear. "Do you do this often? Rescue strangers?" Daniel's response came after a moment, as if he was choosing his words with care. "My wife, before she passed, she used to say people forget how to see each other. I don't want my daughter growing up in that world." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, their simplicity concealing depths she wasn't sure she wanted to explore. She'd spent 13 years, since the accident that had stolen her legs, learning to read people for their angles, their agendas, their secret calculations. This man carrying her through a storm apparently did so because his dead wife had believed in seeing people. When Daniel's boot caught on an exposed root and he stumbled, Isabella felt her grip tighten on his shoulders, felt him steady himself through sheer will, never loosening his hold on her. Something shifted in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with body heat and everything to do with the realization that he was suffering for her without complaint, without expectation. When was the last time someone had carried her who wasn't being paid? She tested him, unable to help herself. "You could probably get a reward for this," she ventured. "People pay good money for roadside assistance." His response was immediate, almost reflexive. "That's not why people should help people." Isabella fell silent, watching the rain mat his dark hair. Seeing the tremor in his shoulders, he thought he was hiding. She stopped updating her brother. The coordinates were enough. Right now, in this moment of raw humanity, she just wanted to watch, to observe what kindness looked like when it wasn't performing. They reached a small house that seemed to huddle against the storm, its paint peeling, porch sagging under the weight of too many hard seasons, but flower boxes hung in the windows, their contents lovingly maintained even in November's approach. Daniel carried her up the steps, careful with each one, and shouldered open a door that stuck from moisture. Inside, warmth embraced them. The smell of old wood and laundry detergent, and something Isabella couldn't quite name. Something that felt like safety. He set her carefully on a worn couch, its cushions bearing the imprints of years of use, and she took in the home with eyes trained to assess value. The furniture was mismatched, walls needing paint. But everywhere she looked there were touches of warmth. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator like colorful prayers, photos of a smiling woman with Daniel's arm around her shoulders. Both of them, younger, happier, unaware of the grief waiting in their future. Hand-sewn curtains that someone had made with more love than skill. "Daddy!" A child's voice rang out like a bell, and a little girl burst from a bedroom, all wild curls and enormous eyes. She froze when she saw Isabella, curiosity replacing excitement. "Emma, this is—" Daniel paused, and Isabella saw him realize he'd carried a stranger 3 miles without learning her name. "I'm sorry. I never asked your name." "Isabella," she said. And the name felt both like truth and lie, because he didn't know it came attached to a fortune and a famous brother and a life of privilege that had somehow left her empty. Emma stepped closer, her child's directness refreshing after years of adults who measured every word. "You're very pretty. Are you a princess? You have princess clothes." Isabella looked down at her mud-ruined designer outfit and almost laughed. Daniel excused himself to find dry clothes, and Isabella found herself alone with a 7-year-old who had no idea how to be anything but genuine. Emma showed her drawings, each one a window into a child's understanding of love and loss. She chattered about school, about her best friend Lily, about how hard her daddy worked. "Daddy works very hard," Emma confided. "He's always tired, but he never says so. He says being tired is just your body asking you to be proud of what you did." The words, delivered with such innocent wisdom, landed in Isabella's heart like seeds. Then Emma noticed the wheelchair Daniel had brought inside, and her question came without pity or awkwardness. "Did your legs stop working?" Isabella, disarmed by the straightforward curiosity, found herself answering honestly. "Yes. When I was 16. A car accident." Emma considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. "That's sad. But you're still here. Daddy says being here is what matters." Something cracked in Isabella's chest, the armor she'd built from disappointment and betrayal developing its first fissure. The simplicity of Emma's acceptance, the absence of performance or calculation, felt like water in a desert she hadn't known she was crossing. Daniel returned with clothes, his late wife's, still kept in a box he couldn't quite bring himself to donate. Isabella changed in the small bathroom, seeing family photos, reading notes Emma had written, and stuck to the mirror with tape. "I love you, Daddy. You're the best. Thank you for pancakes." Each note was a love letter from a daughter to a father doing his best. Dinner was simple. Pasta with canned sauce, the kind of meal made from necessity rather than choice. Daniel was embarrassed by its simplicity. She could see it in how he apologized with his eyes. But when Isabella took the first bite, her eyes closed. This was the first meal in years no one had been paid to prepare for her. Conversation deepened as the storm raged outside. Daniel talked about Sarah, his wife, and his voice carried love and grief in equal measure. "Cancer," he said quietly, glancing at Emma, who was absorbed in arranging pasta on her plate into shapes. 3 years ago. Emma barely remembers her. I'm trying to be enough for both of us. Isabella felt moved to share truth, though not the full truth. "I lost my mobility," she began, choosing words carefully. "But I lost more than that. I lost knowing who to trust. Everyone wants something." Daniel looked at her directly, and his eyes held understanding earned through his own losses. "That sounds like the loneliest thing in the world." The words hung between them, simple and profound, and Isabella felt seen in a way that wealth could never purchase. Her phone buzzed, shattering the moment. The text from Alexander was exactly what she'd expected. En route. 20 minutes. Prepared to compensate your helper generously. Isabella stared at the screen. She should warn Daniel, should prepare him for what was coming, for the revelation that would change how he saw her. But she didn't. Some part of her, the part that had been testing humanity for 13 years and finding it wanting, needed to see his reaction when he learned the truth. Would his kindness evaporate? Would calculation replace compassion? Was this genuine or just another performance that would crumble under the weight of her reality? Emma, full of pasta and warmth, climbed onto the couch between them, her head finding Isabella's lap with the trust only children possess. Isabella froze, looking down at the peaceful face. Dark curls spread across her expensive mud-stained skirt. Daniel watched them both, and something soft entered his weathered features. Something that looked like hope, or perhaps just the memory of when his family had been whole. "When does it get easier?" Isabella whispered into the warm quiet of the small house. "Being everything to someone?" Daniel's response came from somewhere deep. From 3 years of single fatherhood and grief, and choosing to keep going for the small person who needed him. "It doesn't. You just get stronger at carrying it." Before continuing the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers to be able to bring you stories like this every day. For you, it's just a click. But for me, it means a lot. Headlights flooded the windows like searchlights hunting prey, turning the warm glow of the small house into something exposed and vulnerable. Daniel looked up from where he sat beside the sleeping child, and Isabella, his expression shifting from peaceful to confused, as multiple black SUVs pulled up outside, their sleek shapes entirely out of place in this working-class neighborhood where cars wore their dents like badges of survival. The engines cut simultaneously with military precision, and doors opened in unison, disgorging men in dark suits with earpieces and alert eyes that scanned the street as if threats lurked in every shadow. Emma stirred at the commotion, her small body tensing, and Isabella felt her heart begin to race with something that felt like dread mixed with inevitability. The front door, which Daniel had left unlocked in the trusting way of people who still believed in neighbors, opened without a knock, and Alexander Winters entered the small space like a force of nature contained in an expensive suit. He was 6'3" of commanding presence, his tailored clothing probably worth more than Daniel's truck, his bearing that of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around his importance. The modest house suddenly felt even smaller, shrinking under the weight of wealth and power that had no business in a place held together by love and determination. Daniel stood immediately, positioning himself protectively between the strangers and his daughter, his confusion visible in the tight set of his jaw. Emma woke fully, pressing against her father's leg, her eyes wide with the kind of fear children feel when their safe world is invaded by the incomprehensible. Alexander's eyes found Isabella on the couch, and relief washed over his features with an intensity that spoke of hours spent worrying. "Bella," he said, and the nickname felt intimate and foreign in this space. Then his attention shifted to Daniel, and his next words came with the casual certainty of someone who solved problems with money. "You helped my sister. Name your price." The air in the room froze, as if winter had suddenly invaded through cracks in the walls. Daniel looked at Isabella, really looked at her, and she watched something die in his eyes, something precious and fragile that had been growing between them over pasta and honest conversation. The betrayal was instant, visible in the way his expression closed off, walls rising that she knew with sickening certainty she would never breach again. He had thought she was vulnerable, alone. Someone who needed his help in a world that had taught him helping was what mattered. She was neither vulnerable nor alone. And the revelation rewrote everything that had passed between them. Isabella watched the transformation with her heart breaking in ways she had forgotten were possible. Watched kindness curdle into something colder. Alexander, oblivious to the shifting emotional atmosphere, or perhaps too accustomed to transactions to recognize genuine connection, continued speaking with the smooth confidence of someone offering a gift. "I'll compensate you for your time and trouble. What would be appropriate? 10,000? 20? The numbers hung in the air like obscenities. Daniel's voice, when it came, was quiet, cold in a way that made Isabella flinch more than shouting ever could. "Your sister is welcome in my home because she's a person who needed help, not because she's anyone's sister. And people aren't transactions." Alexander, for the first time in perhaps years, looked taken aback, his certainty wavering. "I'm trying to thank you," he said, and the confusion in his voice was genuine. Daniel's response was immediate. "You can thank me by leaving. Emma, say goodbye to our guest." The words were final, a door closing with the soft click that meant it would not open again. Isabella felt panic rising in her chest, sharp and suffocating. "Daniel, please." She started, but he cut her off by turning to face her directly, and the hurt in his eyes was worse than any anger could have been. "You let me carry you for 3 miles, he said, his voice breaking despite his attempt to keep it steady. "You sat at my table. You held my daughter. And the whole time you were what? Conducting an experiment? Testing if poor people still have decency?" Alexander tried to intervene, his protective instincts toward his sister overriding his confusion. "She didn't mean," he began, but Isabella cut him off with a sharpness that surprised them both. "Alex! Stop!" She looked at Daniel, tears forming in her eyes, years of armor cracking under the weight of genuine remorse. "You're right. I lied. About my phone. About being stranded. My driver abandoned me. Yes, but I could have called my brother immediately. I didn't because I wanted to see." Daniel's response was immediate, bitter. "See what? If the circus animal would perform?" The words stung because they contained truth, because she had been testing him, because her wealth and privilege had taught her to doubt everything good. "If kindness still existed," Isabella said, tears falling freely now. "If people like you still existed, everyone in my world wants something from me. My brother's money, my family's influence, access to power and privilege. You're the first person in 13 years who looked at me and just saw someone who needed help." Her voice strengthened with desperation, needing him to understand even if he never forgave. "I'm sorry I tested you. I'm sorry I didn't trust that what you were showing me was real. But Daniel, I need you to understand. In my world, nothing is real. Everything is performance. Everyone is playing an angle. You are the first person who wasn't, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't trust it because trusting has cost me everything." Daniel's voice, when he responded, was breaking, raw with emotion he couldn't quite control. "I carried you because that's what you do for people, not because I'm simple or noble or whatever story you're writing in your head about the poor noble savage. Because my daughter is watching, and I want her to grow up believing the world is better than it is, even when it disappoints me. Even when people like you prove that cynicism was right all along." Emma was crying quietly now, clutching her father's leg, her small face confused by adult pain she couldn't fully comprehend. Alexander made one more attempt, his voice gentler. "Daniel, my sister made a mistake, but her gratitude is genuine. Please, let me get out," Daniel said, and the finality in his voice was absolute. "Take your money. Take your sister. We don't need your world here." Security personnel moved forward, and one of them lifted Isabella from the couch with professional efficiency, carrying her toward the door. She looked back at the small house, at Daniel, who had already turned away, at Emma crying against her father's leg, at the warmth and safety she had felt so briefly and lost so completely. The door closed behind them with a soft sound that felt like the end of everything. In the SUV, leather seats and climate control, and all the luxuries wealth could provide, Alexander tried to understand. "Bella, what were you thinking? You can't just test people like that. You can't play games with—" "I found something real, Alex," Isabella interrupted, her voice hollow. "For the first time since the accident, someone looked at me and saw a person, not a tragedy or a liability or a path to your bank account. And I ruined it by not trusting it, by being exactly what 13 years of disappointment taught me to be." Alexander's voice softened, his protective instincts toward his sister warring with his confusion. "You were protecting yourself. After everything you've been through, after everyone who—" "I was wrong," Isabella said simply. "He had nothing and gave everything. I had everything and gave nothing but suspicion and lies, and the kind of cynicism that makes genuine kindness impossible." The next day, unfolded in parallel suffering, Daniel went to work, his body going through familiar motions while his mind replayed the previous night in endless loops. His co-worker, Marcus, noticed immediately, concern written across his weathered face. "You look like hell, man. What happened?" But Daniel couldn't explain. Couldn't put into words how he had held something precious for a few hours and had it revealed as illusion. Couldn't articulate the particular pain of being someone's test subject. At school, Emma sat at her desk during art time and drew a picture that made her teacher's eyebrows rise with concern. It showed a man carrying a woman on his back, both of them smiling, rain falling around them like blessings. The teacher, trained to spot signs of trouble or confusion in children, called Daniel during his lunch break, her voice careful. "Emma drew something unusual today. I wanted to check in, make sure everything is all right at home." Daniel looked at the image she described and felt his heart crack further. "Everything is fine," he lied, because explaining required energy he didn't possess. In her sterile luxury penthouse, all glass and steel and stunning views that felt empty as a museum after hours, Isabella stared at photos on her phone. She had taken them secretly, a betrayal she now regretted. One showed Emma asleep, her face peaceful and innocent. Another captured Daniel's humble kitchen. The notes on the mirror, the worn surfaces that spoke of life lived fully despite hardship. She couldn't stop looking at them. Couldn't stop remembering how it felt to sit in that small house and feel more at home than she had in years. Alexander found her 3 days later, still in her room, still staring at those images. "You haven't left your room in 3 days, Bella. Talk to me. What is happening?" Isabella looked at her brother, this man who loved her fiercely and had spent millions trying to make her happy, and spoke truth he needed to hear. "I met someone who reminded me what I lost. Not my legs, Alex. My ability to trust that good exists, without transaction. My ability to believe in people. He gave me that back for a few hours, and I destroyed it because I've forgotten how to accept gifts without interrogating them." Alexander, worried by his sister's spiraling depression, did what powerful men do when faced with problems that money might solve. He had his assistant research, Daniel Harper, compile a file that would reveal whether this man was worthy of his sister's pain or just another opportunist with a better act. The file that landed on his desk 2 days later was not what he expected. Daniel Harper, 32 years old, widower, single father. Wife Sarah died of cancer 3 years prior, medical bills exceeding $400,000 even with insurance. Lost their home to bankruptcy, credit destroyed, wages garnished for years to pay remaining debt. Currently works 3 jobs, construction during the day, weekend shifts at a warehouse, occasional handyman work in the evenings. Behind on rent by 3 months. Eviction notice pending. Daughter Emma needs dental work. Cavities getting worse. Father cannot afford the $800 treatment. Truck is 15 years old, 1 major breakdown from death. No savings for replacement. The man lives on the edge of catastrophe every single day, held together by determination and love for his daughter. Alexander stared at the file, then at his sister. The man who carried you and refused my money? He's drowning. Pride is going to cost him everything, which is why he's worth more than both of us combined, Isabella said quietly. And something in her voice was steel wrapped in sorrow. She sat up straighter, decision crystallizing in her eyes. I'm going back. Not with money, not with offers, with the truth. Alexander looked skeptical. What truth, Bella? What truth could possibly fix what happened? That he saved more than my body that night, Isabella said, her voice strengthening with conviction. He saved something I thought was dead. And maybe I can save something of his too. Not with wealth, with presence. With the honesty I should have given him from the beginning. Alexander remained skeptical but loved his sister enough to agree. To drive her himself in a modest car rather than the fleet of SUVs that had announced their arrival so disastrously. Meanwhile, in Daniel's small house, crisis arrived, wearing a child's face. Emma woke with a fever that turned her skin hot to the touch, a cough that rattled in her small chest. Her eyes glazed with illness. Daniel, already stretched beyond breaking, felt panic claw at his throat. He couldn't afford to miss work. The paycheck was already promised to 3 different creditors, but he couldn't leave Emma alone. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, offered to help, her 82-year-old face kind but frail. And Daniel knew he couldn't ask her to handle a sick child for 12 hours. He made the agonizing choice, called his supervisor, heard the disappointment in the man's voice. That's your second call-out this month, Harper. You're on thin ice. One more financial blow Daniel couldn't absorb. Waves pulling him under while he struggled to keep his daughter's head above water. Emma, feverish and confused, looked at her father with glassy eyes. Daddy, is Isabella ever coming back? Daniel tucked the blankets around her, his heart breaking at the question. No, sweetheart. She has a different life. We were just a moment in it. Emma's response, delivered with the insight children sometimes possess, hit harder than she could know. I liked her. She looked sad but not broken. Like you. Daniel pressed a kiss to his daughter's burning forehead and let the tears fall where she couldn't see them. Alone in his small house with his sick child and his demolished faith in moments that felt real, wondering how much more loss a person could carry before they stopped getting back up. Isabella arrived at Daniel's house 3 days after Emma spoke her wisdom about broken but not shattered people. And this time, there were no SUVs, no security detail, no overwhelming display of wealth and power. Just Alexander driving a modest sedan, helping his sister transfer into her wheelchair with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this countless times, his expensive suit replaced with jeans and a sweater that made him look almost human. Daniel opened the door, and the shock on his face was immediate. His first instinct visible in the way his hand tightened on the doorframe, preparing to close it, to protect himself and his daughter from another invasion of their carefully constructed world. Please, Isabella said, and her voice carried none of the guardedness from their first meeting, just quiet desperation that sounded like truth. 5 minutes. Then I'll leave forever, if you ask me to. Daniel looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, speaking of sleepless nights and worries that multiplied in darkness. His shoulders carrying weights, invisible but crushing. My daughter is sick, he said. and she heard the fear beneath the words. This isn't a good time. Isabella saw it then, the terror of a single parent watching their child suffer while lacking resources to fix it. The particular hell of choosing between work and care when both were survival. "Let me sit with her," she said, wheeling closer. "Please, you look like you haven't slept." Something in her voice, the absence of performance or agenda, made Daniel hesitate. She watched the war play across his features, pride battling exhaustion, anger fighting hope. And then he stepped aside, the door opening like a second chance neither of them deserved but both desperately needed. Emma lay feverish on the couch, her small face flushed, but when she saw Isabella, her eyes brightened with the resilience of children who recover faster than adults from disappointment. "Princess came back," she said, her voice hoarse from coughing. And the simple joy in those words made Isabella's throat tight with emotion. "I did," Isabella said, wheeling to Emma's side with purpose. "I owed your father an apology. And I owed you a story. Can I stay?" Emma nodded, reaching for Isabella's hand. And the trust in that gesture felt like absolution Isabella hadn't earned, but would spend the rest of her life trying to deserve. Daniel watched from across the room as Isabella settled in beside his daughter, pulling a worn children's book from the shelf and beginning to read with voices for each character that made Emma giggle despite her fever. She wiped Emma's forehead with a cool cloth, made her sip water, distracted her from discomfort with questions about her drawings, and stories about nothing in particular. No cameras captured the moment, no audience watched. No reason existed to perform except the simple human desire to ease a child's suffering. And Daniel felt something in his chest begin to thaw. Alexander found him in the kitchen, both men standing in the small space that felt too intimate for the conversation they needed to have. "My sister hasn't been this animated in years," Alexander said quietly, his voice stripped of the commanding certainty that had filled the room days earlier. "You should know, since she met you, she's talked about nothing else. Not your poverty, not your situation, your kindness, your daughter's innocence, the flowers in your window boxes despite everything." Daniel looked at the man who had tried to buy him, seeing now not arrogance, but a brother desperate to fix what money couldn't repair. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I've spent 15 years and $100 million trying to make her happy," Alexander said simply. "You did it in 3 miles. The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither man was quite ready to name. Evening fell, and Emma's fever began to break, sleep taking her naturally rather than through fevered exhaustion. Isabella and Daniel found themselves on the porch, the same sagging boards that had supported them days earlier. But the space between them felt different now, charged with possibility rather than deception. "I need to tell you why I really tested you," Isabella began, and her voice carried the weight of confession. "When I was 16, I was in a car with my best friend. She was driving. We crashed. She walked away. I didn't. For years, I believed people stayed with me out of loyalty, or guilt, or because my brother paid them to. I became impossible to reach because I didn't believe anyone would try without ulterior motive." Daniel felt his anger soften, not disappearing but transforming into something more complex. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said, and meant it. "I'm not telling you for sympathy," Isabella continued, needing him to understand. "I'm telling you because that night, when you picked me up from the mud, you didn't see my wheelchair first. You saw a person. Do you know how rare that is?" Daniel's response came from the place in him that still believed the world should be better than it was. "It shouldn't be rare. It should be basic. That's what I mean," Isabella said, tears forming in her eyes. "You live in a world where that's still true. I don't. I haven't for 13 years. She took a breath, gathering courage for the rest. "I tested you because I've been disappointed so many times I forgot what real looked like. You passed every test, not because you're a saint, but because you're genuine. And when my brother offered you money, I watched your face. You were hurt, but not because we had money, because I'd violated your trust." Daniel felt the words land in the tender places, His anger had been protecting. I was hurt because I thought, for a few hours, I had a friend. Someone who saw this life. He gestured at his worn house with its peeling paint and lovingly maintained flower boxes, and didn't judge it, just sat in it with me. Isabella's tears fell freely now, catching light from the porch bulb that Daniel had replaced 3 times because letting it stay dark felt like giving up. "You did have a friend," she said. "You have one now, if you'll let me stay." Morning came with pale light through thin curtains and Emma's fever fully broken. Her skin cool to the touch, her breathing easy. Daniel had to go to work. Already missed too many days. Already heard the warning in his supervisor's voice. Already felt the ground crumbling beneath his feet. Isabella made her offer before fear could make him refuse. "Let me stay with her. I'm qualified. I was a child psychologist before the accident. I'm certified in pediatric care, and I promise I'm not going anywhere." Daniel was torn, pride and practicality warring in his exhausted mind. Accept help from wealth, or leave his daughter with Mrs. Chen, whose hands shook and whose hearing was failing. He chose trust, chose to believe that sometimes accepting help was strength, not weakness. "Okay," he said, looking directly at Isabella. "But this isn't about your money or your brother. This is me trusting you. Don't make me regret it." "I won't," Isabella promised, and the weight of that promise settled on her shoulders like a sacred responsibility. The day unfolded in gentle domesticity that neither woman had experienced in different ways. Isabella directed from her wheelchair as Emma, feeling better but still weak, helped make cookies. The kitchen becoming a disaster of flour and laughter. They mixed ingredients with abandon, tasted batter despite warnings about raw eggs, decorated with more creativity than skill. Emma asked with the directness of children who haven't learned to hide their hearts, "Do you think my daddy likes you?" Isabella, caught entirely off guard, felt her face warm. "I hope so. I like him very much." Emma studied her with the wisdom that sometimes visits children who have known loss. "He smiles different when you're here, like when Mommy was alive. I saw pictures." Isabella's heart cracked open at the observation, at the gift of being compared to a woman who had clearly been loved beyond measure. "Your mother must have been wonderful," she said softly. "Daddy says she was magic," Emma replied, carefully placing a cookie on the baking sheet. "Your father is wise," Isabella said, understanding now where Emma's insight came from. Emma turned to her then, eyes serious. "Are you magic too?" Isabella, crying now from the pure hope in the question, from the responsibility of a child's belief, whispered her truth. "I want to be." The afternoon shattered when someone knocked, heavy-fisted and impatient. Isabella opened the door to find the landlord, a man whose face suggested he'd stopped caring about tenant struggles years ago, holding papers that could only mean one thing. "Eviction notice," he said without preamble. 3 months behind. 30 days to vacate or face legal action. Isabella felt protective fury rise in her chest, sent Emma to her room with gentle firmness, and confronted the man in the doorway. "What would it take to delay the eviction?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to solving problems. $6,000 and an act of God," he said, smirking at the impossibility. Isabella called Alexander with hands that barely trembled, her voice steady as she asked him to handle something discreetly, very discreetly, in a way that wouldn't make Daniel feel bought or pitied or less than the extraordinary man he was. Daniel came home to find his kitchen transformed into a battlefield of baking. Isabella and Emma covered in flour like snow, both laughing at some shared joke, and for the first time since Sarah died, his house felt like a home rather than a shelter against grief. The joy froze when Isabella pulled him aside and told him about the landlord, watching his face crumble with the weight of one more thing, one more failure, one more way he was falling short despite trying with everything he had. "I knew it was coming," he said, voice breaking. "I just hoped I'd figure something out before it got here." "What if you didn't have to?" Isabella said carefully, knowing she had to navigate this perfectly or lose him forever. "Isabella, no," Daniel responded immediately, old defenses rising. I won't take your money. I can't. What if it wasn't a gift? Isabella countered. What if it was a job? She explained quickly before he could refuse, words tumbling over each other in their urgency. I was a child psychologist before the accident. I've wanted to return to work but haven't found the right situation. I need an assistant, someone who understands real struggles, real people, real compassion. The job comes with a salary, enough to cover rent with extra. And I need help with mobility, someone strong enough to carry me when technology fails. You're creating a job that doesn't exist, Daniel said, seeing through the construction but moved by it nonetheless. I'm creating a job I desperately need, Isabella insisted. Daniel, I've been dead inside since the accident. You and Emma reminded me what living feels like. If you won't let me help you, let me help myself. I need you both in my life. This is the only way I know how to make that work without your pride getting in the way. Daniel stood at the crossroads. Accept help and provide for Emma, or cling to pride and lose everything. When Emma appeared in the doorway like an angel sent to tip the scales. Daddy, can Isabella be our friend? Please? Daniel looked at his daughter's hopeful face, at Isabella's tears, at the eviction notice on the table that represented everything he'd failed to prevent, and made his choice. On one condition, he said. We pay off the back rent together. You pay 3 months, I pay 3 months when I can. This is a partnership, not charity. Deal, Isabella said, smiling through tears. And something fundamental shifted in the universe. 2 broken people deciding to hold each other up instead of falling alone. 6 months passed like chapters in a story being written in real time. Daniel worked as Isabella's assistant and community outreach coordinator, discovering he was good at connecting with people who needed help but were too proud to ask, understanding their resistance because he'd lived it. Isabella opened a free counseling center in Daniel's neighborhood, serving families who couldn't afford mental health care, staffed with professionals who understood that poverty wasn't a moral failing, but a circumstance that required compassion, not judgment. Emma thrived in ways that broke Daniel's heart with gratitude. Her dental work completed, her smile bright and pain-free, art classes feeding her creative soul in ways he'd always wanted but couldn't provide. Daniel and Isabella built something slowly, carefully, neither rushing to name what was growing between them, but both feeling it in the easy way they moved around each other, the comfortable silences, the shared glances when Emma said something wise beyond her years. Another rainy night found them at the community center. Isabella's wheelchair stuck in mud that seemed determined to test Daniel's carrying capacity regularly. He lifted her with practiced ease now, and she laughed in his arms, the sound free of the guardedness that had defined their first meeting. You know, this is becoming a habit, she said. Good habits are worth keeping, Daniel replied, and the simple words carried everything they hadn't yet spoken aloud. Emma ran ahead, opening doors, her voice calling back through the rain. Hurry up, you two! People are waiting! Isabella, safe in Daniel's arms, whispered what her heart had known since that first rainy night. Thank you for seeing me that night. Thank you for coming back, Daniel said, and in those words was forgiveness and hope and the promise of tomorrow. Because sometimes the greatest rescues aren't physical, they're emotional. They're 2 people finding each other in the mud and deciding to carry each other through life. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs reminding that kindness still exists, that people still help people not for reward, but because that's what makes us human. The world needs more people willing to carry each other through rain, through pain, through hope, because that's what we're here for. To see each other truly, to help each other genuinely, to be the light in someone else's darkness when their own has gone out.